Hello and welcome back. Today we'll be learning a lesson written by Charles Lamb and it is known as Ulysses and the Cyclops. So let's begin with the lesson. Coasting on all that night by unknown and out of the way shores, they came by daybreak to the land where the Cyclops dwell, a sort of giant shepherds that neither sow nor plow, but the earth until produces for them rich wheat and barley and grapes. Yet they have neither bread nor wine, nor know the arts of cultivation, nor care to know them, for they live each man to himself, without laws or government or anything like a state or kingdom. But their dwelling are in caves, on the steep heads of mountains, every man's household governed by his own caprice, or not governed at all. Ships or boats they have none, no trade or commerce, or wish to visit other shores. Yet they have convenient places for harbours and for shipping. Here Ulysses, with a chosen party of 12 followers, landed to explore what sort of men dwelt there, whether hospitable and friendly to strangers, or altogether wild and savage, for as yet no dwellers appeared in sight. Now, sailing the entire night along the coast, they didn't know where they were going. They had lost their way, and finally, during the daytime, they reached a land where the Cyclops lived. Now, these Cyclops, they are nothing but a sort of giant shepherds here that neither sow or plow, but the earth still produces them rich wheat, barley, and grapes. They get things to eat. They don't know the art of cultivation, they don't care for anyone. They live by themselves without any laws or government or any state or kingdom, and they live in caves. Their dwelling are in caves on the steep heads of the mountains, and every man's household is governed by his own caprice. Caprice meaning a sudden change of mood or behavior. They have no ships or boats, they don't do any trading or business, and they don't even wish to visit other shores. And yet, where they live, they have a lot of place for harbors and for shipping. And here, the people who were actually traveling in that ship were Ulysses and his 12 followers. They landed over there to see what sort of people lived there, whether they were kind and friendly to strangers, or whether they were wild and savage, or there were no people at all in that area. They just wanted to see. The first sign of habitation which they came to was a giant's cave, rudely fashioned, but of a size which betokened the vast proportions of its owner. The pillars which supported it being the bodies of huge oaks or pines in the natural state of the tree, and all about showed more marks of strength than skill in whoever built it. Ulysses, entering in, admired the savage contrivances and artless structure of the place, and longed to see the tenant of so outlandish a mansion, but well conjecturing that gifts would have more avail in extracting courtesy than strength could succeed in forcing it from such a one as he expected to find the inhabitant, he resolved to flatter his hospitality with a present of Greek wine, of which he had stored in 12 great vessels, so strong that no one ever drank it without an infusion of 20 parts of water to one of wine, yet the fragrance of it even then so delicious that it would have vexed a man who smelled it to abstain from tasting it. But whoever tasted it, it was able to raise his courage to the height of heroic deeds. Taking with them a goat skin flagon full of this precious liquor, they went into the recesses of the cave. Now, the first sign of habitation which they came across was the giant's cave, which was rudely fashioned. It was not set in a proper way, but it was of a huge size, and they would realize even the owner was huge. The pillars those supported it were actually the natural state of the oak tree or the pine tree. Because of that, they would realize that the owner who lived there was of strength, was powerful. Ulysses entered it and he admired the artless structure of that place, and he wanted to see to whom did it belong. He wanted to meet that person. So he thought of giving some gift to this owner, and since this person was very powerful in his strength, so he thought what to give, and he wanted to present him with a Greek wine which he had stored in 12 great vessels, in huge vessels, and this wine was so strong that no one ever drank it without adding at least 20 parts of water to one wine. So it was very strong, and even the smell of it, once a person smells it, nobody can avoid tasting it. It was so strong. He took this wine in a goatskin flagon. Flagon is nothing but a large container, and he placed it inside the cave so that when the owner comes inside, he would present it to them. Here, they pleased themselves a whole day with beholding the giant's kitchen, where the flesh of sheep and goats lay strewed. His dairy, where goat milk stood ranged in troughs and pails, his pens, where he kept his live animals, but those he had driven forth to pasture with him when he went out in the morning. While they were feasting their eyes with the sight of these curiosities, their ears were suddenly deafened with a noise like the falling of a house. It was the owner of the cave who had been abroad all day feeding his flock, as his custom was in the mountains, and now drove him home in the evening from pasture. He threw down a heap of firewood which he had been gathering against supper time before the mouth of the cave, which occasioned the crash they heard. The Grecians hid themselves in the remote parts of the cave at sight of the uncouth monster. It was Polyphemus, the largest and savagest of the Cyclops, who boasted himself to be the son of Neptune. He looked more like a mountain crag than a man, and to his brutal body he had a brutish mind answerable. He drove his flock, all that gave milk, to the interior of the cave, but left the male sheep and the he-goats without. Then, taking up a stone so massy that 20 oxen could not have drawn it, he placed it at the mouth of the cave to defend the entrance, and sat him down to milk his female ewes and his goats, which done, he hastily kindled a fire, and throwing his great eye round the cave, for the Cyclops have no more than one eye, and that placed in the midst of their forehead, by the glimmering light, he discerned some of Ulysses' men. Now these people continued seeing the entire area. They could find flesh of sheep and goats, and goat milk was stored in pails. Pails are nothing but some buckets, and there were also some pens where he kept live animals. Pens are nothing but it's a small area where you actually keep these animals like the sheep, goats. And as they were watching all this, suddenly they heard a huge deafening noise. It was like a falling of a house, and actually that was the owner of the cave who had been out all day feeding his flock as it was his custom, and he was bringing them back home in the evening from the pasture. He threw down a heap of firewood which he had gathered for the supper time, and before the mouth of the cave, which occasioned the crash they heard. That was because of the heap of firewood which he put down Because of that, these people heard that noise. And the Grecians were so scared, they hid themselves in the remote parts of the cave when they saw this ugly monster, unquote monster. And it was Polyphemus, the largest and the savagest of the Cyclops. And he boasted himself to be the son of Neptune. And this Cyclope, he looked more like a mountain crag than a man. And he also had bruises all over his body. He drove his flock, all that gave milk, to the interior of the cave, and he left the male sheep and the he goats without. And then he took a huge stone, so massive that 20 oxen could not have drawn it. He placed it in the mouth of the cave so that he closes the entrance so that nobody can go out of it. He sat down to milk the female ewes and the goats, and then he kindled a fire, or he lit a fire, and throwing his great eye around the cave, he saw some of the Ulysses men. And you need to know that Cyclops, they have only one eye, and it is in the middle of their forehead. "Oh, guest, what are you? Merchants or wandering thieves?" he bellowed out in a voice which took from them all power of reply. It was so astounding. Only Ulysses summoned resolution to answer that they came neither for plunder nor business, but were Grecians who had lost their way returning from Troy. Yet now they prostrated themselves humbly before his feet, whom they acknowledged to be mightier than they, and besought him that he would bestow the rights of hospitality upon them. So as soon as the Cyclops saw them, he said, "Oh, guest, and what are you? Like merchants or thieves?" He said it in a voice which was very powerful, and only Ulysses had the courage to come front and answer him, and he said that we are not here for business or any robbery. We are Grecians, and we lost our way while returning from Troy, and we humbly prostrate in front of you. You are more mightier, you're more powerful than us. We hope that you attend us with hospitality." He replied nothing, but gripping two of the nearest of them as if they had been no more than children, he dashed their brains out against the earth, and, shocking to relate, tore in pieces their limbs and devoured them, yet warm and trembling, making a lion's meal of them, lapping the blood. For the Cyclops are man-eaters, and esteem human flesh to be a delicacy far above goats or kids, though by reason of their abhorred customs few men approach the coast, except some stragglers, and now and then a shipwrecked mariner. At a sight so horrid, Ulysses and his men were like distracted people. He, when he had made an end of his wicked supper, drained a draught of goat's milk down his prodigious throat, and lay down and slept among his goats. Then Ulysses drew his sword, and half resolved to thrust it with all his might in at the bosom of the sleeping monster. But wiser thoughts restrained him, else they are without help. All perished, for none but Polyphemus himself could have removed that mass of stone which he had placed to guard the entrance. So they were constrained to abide all that night in fear. Now this Cyclope, he replied nothing, but what he did is, he gripped two of the nearest men of Ulysses, and he dashed their brains out against the earth, that is, he hit them hard, such that they died, and he tore them into pieces and he ate them. And you need to know that Cyclops are man-eaters. They eat human flesh, they love it. And looking at this, the Ulysses and his men were so distracted, they were scared, and they started running here and there, they started hiding themselves. And this Cyclope, he drank a large amount of goat's milk and he slept. Now Ulysses was very brave. What he did is, he drew his sword and he was about to kill the sleeping monster. But then he remembered, you need to know that he was wise. So he remembered, if I kill this monster, then we are trapped in this area, because that huge mass of stone which is covering or guarding the entrance, no one can remove it other than this monster. So we have to stay alive in fear the entire night. We cannot kill him. When day came, the Cyclops awoke and, kindling a fire, made his breakfast of 2 other of his unfortunate prisoners, then milked his goats as he was accustomed, and pushing aside the vast stone and shutting it again, when he had done upon the prisoners with as much ease as a man opens and shuts a quiver's lid, he let out his flock and drove them before him with whistlings as sharp as winds in storms to the mountains. Now again, when it was early morning, when day came, the Cyclops woke up, he kindled a fire again, and again he took 2 of the Ulysses men for his breakfast. Again he drank the goat milk, and he pushed aside the stone, took all the flocks with him for pasturing, and closed the lid again, or closed the stone again. Then Ulysses, of whose strength or cunning the Cyclops seems to have had as little heed as of an infant's, being left along with the remnant of his men, which the Cyclops had not devoured, gave manifest proof how far manly wisdom excels brutish force. He chose a stake from among the wood which the Cyclops had piled up for firing, in length and thickness like a mast, which he sharpened and hardened in the fire, and selected 4 men, and instructed them what they should do with the stake, and made them perfect in their parts. So these men were trapped inside. Now Ulysses, he thought of the Cyclops that he was only powerful, but he didn't have a brain. So these people thought of making a plan. He chose a stake from among the wood which the Cyclops had piled up for firing, the long wood, which was very strong in length and as well as thickness, and he started sharpening it from one side, and he selected 4 people from his members, and he instructed them what to do with that stake, and he made them perfect in their parts. They all knew what to do. When the evening was come, the Cyclops drove home his sheep, and as fortune directed it, either of purpose or that his memory was overruled by the gods to his hurt, he drove the males of his flock, contrary to his custom, along with the dams into the pens. Then, shutting the stone of the cave, he fell to his horrible supper. When he had dispatched 2 more of the Grecians, Ulysses waxed bold with the contemplation of his project, and took a bowl of Greek wine, and merrily dared the Cyclops to drink. So when it was evening, the Cyclops came back with all his sheep and goats. Again he drove the males inside and put them into the pens, then shut the stone of the cave, and he fell to his horrible supper again. He ate 2 of them again, and at that time Ulysses, he made a little bit of courage, and he went forward and he took a bowl of the Greek wine which he had taken for the Cyclops, and he gave it or offered it to the Cyclops. I hope you have understood the story till now, and the next part will be continued in the next video. Until then, do keep watching and do like and subscribe to my channel. Thank you, and keep watching for the next video.